Master of Reality was the third observation by Black Sabbath. It was released in 1971, less than a year after Paranoid. In fact, you would think that typically a lot of bands that were faced with this situation, releasing an album that was considered to be revolutionary, an album that was destined to shape a new form of music, a new genre of music that you and I, Cover Killer Nation, that we find beloved, would really incur a lot of stress and a lot of, well, paranoia. How do you follow it up? What do you do now? Well, considering they released these LPs so quickly and within a certain abridged period of time, this was not a problem for Black Sabbath. They were already writing the material for the next album within a month or two after the release of Paranoid. So, they didn't have time to actually stop and think about this, nor did they really want to. Master of Reality is an album that has a lot of different characteristics to it. For one, it's heavier than the previous two releases, and this is due to an accident in which Tony Iommi suffered, which involved his fingers. He had to alter the tuning of his guitar, which created that very, very low, very, very doomy crunch that a lot of doom metal bands of today will even cite as a principal influence for the reason why their guitars are down-tuned so far. Master of Reality also shows Ozzy in a very dynamic environment. This is an album that almost flows like a cinematic experience, and I think this is due in part, firstly, by the presence of the tracks such as Embryo, that really just kind of bind a couple of songs together. You know what I mean? Like, After Forever it goes right into Embryo and it binds it together to the next track. And it's something that works quite nicely. This is actually an album that, whenever you examine it in LP form, whenever you actually get the record, the vinyl of it, and you examine it, and perhaps you have a European version or a United States version, you're going to notice some inconsistencies, some differences, some added tracks, things like that. Mainly because there were introductions, there were little pieces, there were, basically the first part of the song was considered to be a separate idea, almost like they were writing a dual-part epic, like some sort of progressive metal band. But instead they were represented on the vinyl as two separate ideas, which is kind of a cool little thing. In fact, this is an album that's full of a ton of inconsistencies whenever it comes to the way in which it's represented on the back. And a very good example is that the form that I have, which is a CD form, actually has a mislisting of the final two tracks. Into the Void and Solitude are actually flip-flopped on this particular release, which is kind of very disorienting. Whenever you listen to it, you feel and you see Into the Void as actually Solitude, which is not right at all, obviously. Solitude should be previous to Into the Void. This is also an album that's going to be, for me at least, perhaps maybe for you, an album that's all about the bookends, so to speak. Everything that's embodied within is of a very nice characteristic. It's very aggressive, but at the same time it's very melodic. There's a lot of great music engrossed and encased within this album. It's one where you see a lot of raw emotion, but at the same time you also see a lot of reality. This is observations from a band that has already been able to observe some of the things, you know, on their first two records that a lot of people would be too afraid to really speak about in such a direct fashion. They've spoken about it. This is subject matter that's not necessarily too new. However, they speak to it in a direct fashion, and they're not afraid to use a negative metaphor or a negative idea or an evil idea, as opposed to trying to spin a web around it to make it seem as though it's something that's good. But the bookends are really what's encouraging and also very spectacular for me. Sweet Leaf, the opening track on this release, is something that really gets me pumped up. In fact, this was one of the very first Black Sabbath songs that I ever encountered in my musical journey. I really enjoyed the riff. The riff is one of those intoxicating melodies that will stay in your head forever. Doesn't matter what you're doing. You could be going over to get a piece of toast, you could be walking down the street, you could be going to work, you could be jacking off or something, and all of a sudden you just hear da 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 da, and then you almost want to fuck with it. You really want to fuck with it. You almost want to like slow it down, or Alvin and the Chipmunks it and make it go do 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 do, or then you get to the last two songs on the album. Into the Void is kind of an interesting idea. You could really see that this is all about war. But Solitude is the track where it's at for me. mainly because Ozzy Osbourne is able to really showcase his ability to be a very calm and cool and almost haunting vocalist. And this is one of his strongest vocal performances to date in the Black Sabbath discography, mainly because you almost see and hear, in fact you do hear, Ozzy just bleeding emotion dry. But he's doing it in such a subtle manner, in a manner that is very easily replicable. But you can never, ever, ever match his charisma, his emotion, his passion, the feeling behind this track whenever he's speaking these words. Oliver did their damned best to do so whenever they covered this track, and you know what? It's one of those things where it was damn good because Oliver is a fantastic, phenomenal band. However, they fell short to this original. This is an original piece that is just absolutely haunting. It has a very soft melody behind it, and then Ozzy's vocals are just bleeding out of the stereo system, almost as though he is trying and pining and writing the song for you. No matter what sex you may be, no matter how old you may be, it is almost like his way of saying, this was all for you, all I do is think about you. It's such an interesting and awesome ideal, not to mention the way in which it's represented, the representation, that was funny as shit, is just amazing. You will find haunting moments like this throughout this whole entire LP. It's almost as though this was the album that was kind of cursed for them. And I don't mean cursed in the regard that it didn't sell well, it didn't do well, nobody gave a shit. A lot of people give a shit. This is a tremendously successful album, 2 times platinum. And that might not seem like much considering Adele is 11 times platinum in 1 year, and this is 2 times platinum over the period of nearly 40. However, you have to understand, this is a budding genre, for one, and for two, people are still deathly afraid of Black Sabbath. This is one of the premier pieces of their catalog. Many people will consider it to be their favorite, if they don't cite an album such as Paranoid. However, a lot of people will also say that the next release is their favorite. And I'm about to go and examine why.